My name is Sarah. I'm 42 years old, and my heart completely stopped when I looked at the medical chart in my hands and saw the name of the man lying in the hospital dead right in front of me. It was him, the same man who 15 years ago looked me dead in the eye and delivered the cruelest ultimatum I had ever heard. "Choose me or your dream," my fiancé said, standing in our tiny apartment, making me feel like the worst person in the world for wanting to be a surgeon. Now, 15 years later, he was my patient, his life was in my hands, and to understand how incredibly crazy this moment was, you really have to know how it all started. Back when I was in my 20s, I was completely and utterly in love with David. He is a 45-year-old man now, but back then he was a charming 30-year-old who seemed to have his whole life perfectly figured out. We first met at a little coffee shop downtown where I used to study for my college exams. He was funny, he paid for my coffee, and he made me feel incredibly special. For a long time, I honestly thought he was the man I was going to marry, buy a house with, and build a beautiful family with. I was ready to spend my entire life by his side. But there was always a dark, heavy shadow hovering over our relationship. My dream. Since I was a little girl running around the house playing with toy stethoscopes, I desperately wanted to be a doctor. I didn't just want to help people in a small clinic. I wanted to be right there in the operating room as the lead surgeon. It was a massive, intimidating dream, especially coming from a very simple working-class family like mine. My mother, Martha, a 68-year-old retired teacher, always told me I could do absolutely anything. But David only tolerated the idea when it was just a distant, unlikely plan. Things started to get really toxic when I officially began preparing for the medical school admission tests. I had to study literally all the time. I was working a terrible, exhausting desk job during the day to pay the bills and studying until 2 in the morning every single night. David would get incredibly annoyed and passive-aggressive. He would constantly complain that I wasn't giving him enough attention, that I was completely obsessed, and that I was putting my stupid books above our relationship. I tried to calmly explain it was just a temporary sacrifice for our future, but he bluntly refused to see it. Then the life-changing day finally came, the day I got the official acceptance letter from one of the absolute best medical programs in the entire state. I remember my hands physically shaking as I nervously ripped open the thick envelope. I cried so hard I couldn't even catch my breath. I called my mom first, and we screamed and cried on the phone together in pure joy. I was so incredibly happy. I bought a really nice dinner, rushed back to our apartment, and set the table, eagerly waiting for David to come home. I thought we were finally going to celebrate my hard work and all those sleepless nights. When he walked through the door, I ran straight to him and proudly showed him the letter. I expected a huge hug, a proud smile, literally anything supportive. Instead, his face immediately dropped into a scowl. He looked at the letter with pure disgust, threw it carelessly on the kitchen counter, and let out a heavy, disappointed sigh. "So you are really going to do this?" he asked, his voice freezing cold. I was so confused. I asked him what he meant. That was when he dropped the massive bomb that shattered my heart. He told me he wanted a traditional stay-at-home wife, not a hospital ghost who was never around. We fought brutally for hours. I cried uncontrollably. I begged him to just try and understand my passion. I told him we could easily make it work, that true love was supposed to support big dreams, not maliciously kill them. He just shook his head in absolute disgust. He grabbed a large duffel bag, packed his clothes, walked right to the front door, and that is exactly when he said it. "Choose me or your dream." He gave me until the morning to decide my fate. He left, and the heavy door slamming shut felt like a physical punch right to my stomach. I slid down the wall and cried until my throat burned. I called my mom at 3 in the morning, completely hysterical and hyperventilating. "Mom, he is going to leave me!" I sobbed violently into the phone. My mother, with all the beautiful wisdom in the world, just listened quietly for a long while before speaking. Sarah, a man who truly loves you will never, ever make you choose between him and your true potential. If you give this amazing opportunity up for him, you will resent him for the rest of your life. Her harsh words hit me like a ton of heavy bricks. It hurt so incredibly much, but deep down in my soul, I knew she was absolutely right. The very next morning, I packed the rest of his belongings into cardboard boxes. When he confidently came back, fully expecting me to be crying and begging on my knees for him to stay, I just silently pointed to the boxes by the door. I chose my dream. He called me selfish, screamed that I would end up completely alone and miserable, and walked out of my life forever. The pain of the awful breakup was truly agonizing. There were many lonely nights I almost called him, nights I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. But every time I felt weak, I forced myself to open my heavy medical books. Medical school was beyond brutal. It was easily 10 times harder than I ever imagined in my worst nightmares. I was a few years older than most of my young classmates. I was completely broke, and I was constantly bone-deep exhausted. I lived on cheap instant noodles and terrible cafeteria coffee. I missed important family gatherings, birthdays, and holidays. Sometimes the academic stress was so intensely bad, I would hide in the hospital bathroom stalls just to cry silently for 5 minutes before going back to clinical rounds. The crushing pressure was immense, and David's toxic voice haunted my thoughts. But I absolutely did not fail. I relentlessly pushed through the darkest, most difficult days. I met my absolute best friend, Emily, a 42-year-old brilliant pediatrician now, during our terrible second year. We quickly became each other's solid rock. We studied together until dawn, cried together, and celebrated every tiny victory. During one particularly hard night, I finally told Emily about David's cruel ultimatum. She looked at me fiercely and said, "The absolute best revenge is massive success. You are going to be an amazing surgeon." Her powerful words became my daily survival mantra. The hard years slowly went by. I successfully finished medical school, barely survived a grueling, highly competitive surgical residency, and finally became an attending general surgeon. I built a beautiful life I was deeply proud of. I bought my own big house, I traveled the world, and most importantly, I saved countless lives. I proved to myself that I was fully capable. The sharp pain of the past completely faded, replaced by the quiet, solid confidence of a woman who built her own empire from absolutely nothing. I hadn't thought about David in many years. He was just a faded ghost from the past. That was until yesterday afternoon. I was on a regular shift at the hospital, carefully reviewing the afternoon surgery schedule at the bustling nurses' station. I had a very complex gallbladder removal scheduled. The patient had severe, life-threatening complications, and it was going to be a highly delicate procedure. I confidently grabbed the thick medical chart and walked down the long hallway toward room 412. That is the exact moment I saw the printed name, David Miller. My stomach did a violent, weird flip. It is a very common name, I told myself quickly, but as I pushed the door open, I stopped. It was undoubtedly him. He looked so much older, deeply tired, and clearly in a massive amount of physical pain. His skin was shockingly pale, and he looked much thinner and frailer than I ever remembered. He was just staring blankly at the white ceiling, tightly holding his inflamed stomach. I stood completely frozen at the door for a few seconds, processing the absolute shock. The universe truly has a sick, twisted sense of humor. The arrogant man who told me I was entirely selfish for wanting to be a doctor was now lying helpless in a hospital bed, desperately waiting for me. I walked right in. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady, calm, and highly professional. He turned his head very slowly toward the door. I saw the exact, precise moment his brain finally registered who I was. His tired eyes went incredibly wide, his mouth opened slightly in pure shock, but no words came out at all. The heart monitor tracking his vitals started beeping noticeably faster. "Sarah?" he whispered weakly, his voice hoarse and full of pure disbelief. "Dr. Sarah," I corrected him gently but very firmly. "I am the lead surgeon officially taking over your case today." The thick silence in the hospital room was absolutely deafening. Deep shame washed over his pale face like a massive tidal wave. He looked down at his shaking hands, completely avoiding my eyes. I, I didn't know you worked here," he mumbled pathetically. "I work here, and I actually run the entire surgical wing on this floor," I replied calmly. I didn't say it to be petty or brag. I said it because it was the absolute truth. It was the beautiful reality I built after he aggressively swore I would be nothing. I opened his heavy medical chart and kept everything strictly professional. I thoroughly explained the severe surgical risks, the complicated procedure, and the long, painful recovery process. I didn't let a single ounce of our toxic personal history bleed into my medical assessment. He just nodded silently, looking incredibly small and deeply defeated. When I asked if he had any questions about the surgery, he hesitated nervously. "Dr. Sarah, I am so incredibly sorry," he said, his voice actually breaking with heavy emotion. "For everything I did. I was so incredibly wrong about you. I was just a stupid, insecure boy back then, and I deeply regret my choices." I looked at him. I really, truly looked at him. 15 long years ago, hearing those exact words would have meant the absolute world to me. I would have cried tears of immense joy. But right now, I felt absolutely nothing. No burning anger, no bitter resentment, no arrogant triumph. Just a calm, profound, peaceful indifference. "Mr. Miller, my only concern right now is your severely inflamed gallbladder and making absolutely sure you get out of this hospital safely. We can leave the past exactly where it rightfully belongs, in the past," I said clearly. He nodded very slowly, tears in his eyes. I quickly left the room and went straight to prep for the complicated surgery. Emily found me in the scrub room. "I saw the patient list. Is that the David?" she asked, her eyes wide with shock. I nodded silently, intensely scrubbing my hands with iodine. "Wow, how do you feel? Do you want me to get Dr. Evans to do the surgery?" she asked, deeply worried about me. "No," I said firmly. "I am his doctor. I am going to do my job perfectly. He is just another patient on a table." Emily smiled warmly, immensely proud of the strong woman I had become. The intense surgery took exactly 3 hours. It was extremely complicated, just as the detailed scans had shown. There was a lot of dangerous inflammation, and it required extreme precision. As I stood over him, working meticulously, I realized something truly powerful. I literally held his man's life in my bare hands, the exact same hands he once aggressively tried to hold back. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt entirely focused. I safely saved his life that day, using the exact skills he had hated. The surgery was an absolute complete success. I immediately went to the waiting room to update his family, but there was absolutely no one there. The nurses quietly told me his emergency contact was an ex-wife who lived out of state, and she emphatically wasn't coming. He was completely alone. The man who arrogantly told me I would end up entirely alone and miserable because I chose my demanding career was now recovering from major surgery without a single person sitting by his lonely bedside. It was a harsh, undeniable reality check on how life unfolds when you treat people poorly. The very next morning, I did my regular rounds and stopped by his room. He was fully awake, looking much better with some healthy color back in his face. "The surgery went perfectly, Mr. Miller. You will be sore for a few weeks, but you are going to make a full recovery," I told him, efficiently checking his vitals. He looked at me with a complex mix of deep gratitude and heavy regret. "Thank you. You saved my life," he said softly. "You are an incredible doctor. I am genuinely glad you didn't listen to me." I calmly closed his medical chart and gave him a polite, professional nod. "Rest up. The nurses will bring your pain medication soon," I said, turning to leave the room. "Sarah, wait," he called out desperately. I stopped right at the door. "Are you happy with your life?" he asked, sounding absolutely desperate for some kind of human connection. I turned around, looking at the sterile hospital room, thinking about my beautiful home, my amazing friends, and the deep satisfaction I felt every single day when I put on my scrubs. I am very happy, David. I have absolutely everything I ever worked for, I said simply and honestly. I didn't need to rub anything in his face. My strong presence, my crisp white coat, my shiny name tag with MD heavily engraved on it was more than enough. I walked out of that hospital room feeling significantly lighter than I had in 15 years. The invisible heavy weight I didn't even know I was still carrying completely vanished. I had finally truly closed the circle on my dark past. I went to the cafeteria, bought an overpriced coffee, and sat by the window watching the city wake up. Looking back now, I clearly realized that the absolute worst moment of my entire life was actually the greatest, most beautiful gift I could have ever received. If he hadn't selfishly forced me to choose, I might have foolishly tried to compromise. I might have tragically settled for so much less just to keep the fragile peace. His incredible cruelty brutally pushed me to fully embrace my inner strength. I learned that true love will never, ever ask you to make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. I chose myself, and it was the best decision of my life. I learned the hard way that when toxic people try to aggressively crush your big dreams, it is usually because they are absolutely terrified of what you will become once you actually achieve them. They desperately want to keep you in a tiny box because it makes them feel comfortable. But you cannot live your precious life trying to make other insecure people comfortable. You have to bravely fight for what sets your soul on fire, even if it means walking away from people you thought you truly loved, even if it means crying on the floor in the middle of the cold night. Today, I wear my emotional scars just as proudly as I wear my medical stethoscope. I bravely chose my dream, and it beautifully gave me back a life full of deep purpose, total independence, and genuine joy. Now, I really want to know about you. Have you ever had to painfully choose between a person you deeply loved and a massive dream you carried in your heart? Would you have done the exact same thing in my place? Think about it carefully because your choice defines your future. Until the next story.